Imagine the heartache of discovering a crime so horrifying it shakes an entire community. In October 2021, police responded to a haunting call in Houston, Texas, where the decomposed remains of an 8-year-old boy, Kendrick Lee, were found in an abandoned apartment. The mother, Gloria Williams, and her boyfriend, Brian Coulter, became the center of a deeply disturbing story of abuse, neglect, and betrayal. What led to such unimaginable cruelty? And why were the signs of this tragedy ignored? Houston, Texas is a sprawling, vibrant city, an urban landscape teeming with life, culture, and opportunity. Known for its towering skyscrapers, diverse neighborhoods, and endless hustle, Houston has always been a place where the unexpected can happen. But beneath the city's gleaming surface, in the quieter corners, lies a world that few see. Gloria Williams, a 38-year-old mother, had lived a life marred by instability and failed relationships. Friends described her as quiet but noted her pattern of associating with men who exhibited troubling behaviors. She often moved her children from place to place, making it difficult for anyone to track the family's welfare. Despite her outward demeanor, Gloria's decisions often prioritized her relationships over her children's well-being. Brian Coulter, Gloria's boyfriend, was known for his erratic temper and controlling nature. Their relationship quickly became toxic, with Gloria seemingly enabling Brian's abusive behavior. Friends of the couple noticed signs of neglect, but Gloria maintained a facade, insisting everything was fine. The children, including Kendrick Lee, were trapped in a harrowing cycle of abuse and neglect that no child should ever endure. Despite being only 8 years old, Kendrick showed signs of resilience far beyond his years. He had a gentle and playful nature, one that should have been allowed to flourish, but instead was overshadowed by the constant terror in his home. His siblings would later describe him as the protector of the family, always trying to shield them from the violence that permeated every corner of their lives. Even in the most frightening moments, Kendrick would take it upon himself to comfort and watch over his younger brothers and sisters, doing his best to keep their spirits alive. But no matter how hard he tried, the oppressive darkness that hung over their home never lifted. He lived in constant fear, knowing that at any moment, the unpredictable violence of his mother's boyfriend, Brian Coulter, could erupt, leaving him or his siblings physically or emotionally scarred. Gloria's eldest child, a 15-year-old boy, bore the weight of an adulthood he never asked for. With no support or protection from their mother, he became the de facto caregiver for his younger siblings. Forced to grow up far too quickly, he took on the responsibility of keeping the children fed, calm, and as safe as possible, all while dealing with the trauma of witnessing the escalating abuse at home. This heavy burden meant that the children, though still young, had to look after each other, forming a bond of survival in the face of unimaginable neglect. When authorities arrived at the apartment on October 24, 2021, responding to a desperate 911 call from the eldest sibling, they were met with a scene of unimaginable horror. The apartment, once a home, was now a grotesque testament to the suffering the children had endured. The air inside was thick with a nauseating stench of decay, the unmistakable odor of decomposition that made it impossible to ignore the tragedy unfolding within those walls. Dust clung to every surface, and the walls were stained with the remnants of years of neglect, their pale, peeling paint now darkened with grime. The dim light from the broken, flickering bulbs cast long shadows across the room, creating a cold and oppressive atmosphere. In one corner of the apartment, hidden under a tattered blanket, lay the skeletal remains of Kendrick Lee. The once vibrant 8-year-old boy, whose laughter had surely filled the air in another time, was now nothing more than a macabre collection of bones, picked clean by the ravages of time and neglect. His body had been left to rot for over a year, abandoned by those who should have protected him. The blanket that covered his remains was stained, torn, and barely enough to shield the lifeless form beneath it from the cold, unforgiving reality of the apartment. The authorities were struck by the surreal horror of the discovery. This was not just a forgotten child, but a child who had been cruelly left to die in isolation, his body decomposing unnoticed, while those who had been responsible for his care vanished into the shadows of neglect. The rest of the apartment was just as chilling, with rotting food, broken furniture, and garbage piled high, a physical manifestation of the suffering and abandonment the children had endured. The remains of Kendrick Lee were the darkest symbol of a broken system, a tragic reminder of how easily innocence can be forgotten when no one is watching. The other 3 children, malnourished and emotionally scarred, were found in the same apartment. They had been living alongside Kendrick's remains, too terrified to leave or seek help. Their living conditions were described as beyond inhumane, with little food, no electricity, and signs of prolonged physical and emotional abuse. The eldest child, now 16, finally mustered the courage to call 911 after enduring over a year of silence. His voice trembled as he described the horrifying situation to the operator. He explained that Kendrick had been beaten to death by Brian Coulter and that their mother had abandoned them with no resources. When police questioned the children, their testimonies painted a grim picture. They revealed that Brian frequently abused them and that Gloria would often stand by, refusing to intervene. Kendrick's death was particularly brutal. The children recounted how Brian beat him repeatedly until he stopped breathing. After Kendrick's death, Gloria and Brian moved out of the apartment, leaving the children to fend for themselves. As investigators delved deeper, they uncovered chilling details about Kendrick's death and the subsequent neglect. Brian Coulter had beaten Kendrick in November 2020, inflicting fatal injuries. Instead of reporting the death, Gloria and Brian decided to leave the body in the apartment. They continued to collect government benefits meant for the children, using the money to fund their own lives while the children were left to suffer. For months, Gloria and Brian moved from place to place, evading authorities. They occasionally returned to the apartment to drop off minimal food supplies, ignoring the children's pleas for help. The children's teachers and neighbors failed to report their absence, leaving them trapped in silence. When authorities pieced together the horrific details of Kendrick Lee's murder, their focus quickly turned to Gloria Williams, and Brian Coulter. Investigators tracked Gloria and Brian to a nearby hotel, where they were living lavishly using government benefits meant for the children. Surveillance footage showed them casually shopping for alcohol and food, while the children suffered alone. The stark contrast between their carefree demeanor and the tragedy unfolding in the apartment added to the outrage. When officers arrested Brian, his response was chilling. He was emotionless and indifferent, deflecting blame and refusing to accept responsibility. Gloria, on the other hand, appeared tearful, but failed to provide a coherent explanation for her neglect. She admitted to knowing about Kendrick's death, but claimed she was too afraid of Brian to act. The case against Brian Coulter and Gloria Williams was bolstered by overwhelming evidence. Forensic analysis confirmed that Kendrick Lee died from severe blunt force trauma, with injuries consistent with prolonged abuse. Witness testimonies, including those of neighbors and acquaintances, painted Brian as a violent individual prone to uncontrollable outbursts. Digital evidence, such as Gloria's text messages, revealed her active role in covering up the crime and coercing the surviving children into silence. During the trial, the heartbreaking testimony of Kendrick's surviving siblings was pivotal. The eldest child detailed the harrowing years of abuse they endured, describing how Brian's violence went unchecked and how Gloria neglected to intervene. The child's brave recounting of their suffering brought many in the courtroom to tears. The prosecution presented irrefutable proof of Brian's guilt, including DNA evidence linking him to the fatal injuries and surveillance footage showing his nonchalant behavior shortly after Kendrick's death. Gloria's legal team argued that she was a victim of Brian's control, but the prosecution countered with messages proving her complicity in the neglect and abuse. The trial drew intense public attention, with community members and activists gathering outside the courthouse demanding justice. Family members, including Kendrick's extended relatives, expressed their grief and outrage. "We trusted Gloria to protect those children, and she failed them in every way possible," one family member stated during an impact statement. Assistant District Attorney Celeste Byram added, "It is a hard case. You can only imagine what it could have been like for the children experiencing this," she said. "We should never lose a child because a parent is not willing to reach out and ask for help during these situations." On October 27, 2021, Brian Coulter and Gloria Williams faced a courtroom packed with emotional family members, child advocates, and community members seeking justice for Kendrick Lee. The evidence against Brian was irrefutable, including forensic proof of the fatal injuries Kendrick endured, witness testimonies detailing his violent tendencies, and damning autopsy results. Gloria's complicity in the cover-up was equally condemning, with text messages and phone records showcasing her deliberate efforts to silence Kendrick's siblings and conceal his murder. Brian Coulter was convicted of capital murder for Kendrick's brutal death. His sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole reflected the severity of his actions. He remained emotionless as the judgment was delivered, failing to offer any remorse for his heinous crime. Gloria Williams was sentenced to 50 years in prison for charges including injury to a child by omission and tampering with evidence.
Developing this afternoon, a judge hands down a 50-year prison sentence to Houston mother Gloria Williams today. She was accused of letting her son's body decompose for a year after her boyfriend fatally beat the child. Our Stephen Goen is at the Harris County Courthouse with the details. Stephen, what was it like in court today?
More than 4 years in the making. The sentencing came after a punishment hearing today where the defense called multiple people to the stand, including Williams' cousin and her aunt. Just last month, Williams pleaded guilty to 2 counts of injuring a child connected to her son Kendrick Lee's death. The 8-year-old boy's skeletal remains were found in an apartment in 20...
During her trial, she tearfully claimed fear of Brian as a justification for her neglect, but the court found her responsible for failing to protect her children and enabling their prolonged suffering. The siblings of Kendrick, who bravely testified about their years of torment, are now in foster care, beginning their path to healing. Kendrick's family expressed a bittersweet relief at the verdict. Justice has been served, but no sentence will bring Kendrick back. This tragic case left an indelible mark on the community, igniting systemic reforms within child welfare services. The hope remains that Kendrick's story will prevent such horrors from happening again and inspire vigilance to protect vulnerable children.